What's up, Phins fans? I'm Jim Grieshaber. Call me Gries. And with the combine over, the Miami Dolphins have their eyes on some more prospects and turning the corner toward that league year. All kinds of things happening now, including the big decision on Tua. When will it happen? We'll talk about that here today on the show.
Hey, Zgonina, happy Monday. And so happy to have Kyle back in the fold.
You guys, host Kyle Krabs, Locked On Dolphins. You guys know how to make a guy feel welcome. It's good to be back.
Fins up. It's the Dolphins Squad. Everything Miami Dolphins every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from South Beach. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Sunshine, speed, and squad goals. The Dolphins Squad Show starts now.
Yes, it does. Your Dolphins Squad Show today brought to you by FanDuel. That's right. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And Z said it in the open. Look who's back. Back again. Kyle's back. Tell a friend. What's up, Kyle? It's good to have you back, man. You're back from Indy in the combine, and man, oh man, what a week. I've been there. Such an intense week, so much going into it, dropping content, writing stories, seeing prospects, kind of taking some time whenever you can to just put your thoughts together, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, the whole entire experience. So here he is back with us, ladies and gentlemen. Kyle, what was the week like for you in Indy?
Fast. Not as fast as these 40 times were for just about every position that ran, but still fast nonetheless. You kind of set a content calendar and you set your schedule, and you're networking and meeting so-and-so, and I got to meet with so-and-so. And very quickly you realize every year, no matter how many years you've been, and this was year 10 for me at the combine, you always bite off more than you could chew, right? It's just, you're drinking through a fire hose the entire time that you're there. So whether that's the testing, the workouts, the networking, the content, it was a great week. I'm looking forward to breaking down some of what we saw and going from there.
Yeah, and it really is a lot of fun out there, and so many things happen. And you mentioned that's the thing that stood out to me the most, Kyle. And Z, all those years you played and coached in the league, you always think there's going to be a wall when it comes to the speed, but guys just keep getting faster, man.
Well, that's what the game is. The game's not, 3 plays on a cloud of smoke anymore, or dust, excuse me, how it used to be. It just gets faster and faster. These guys are like track athletes, most of them. That's what the game has come to. They dummy down the defenses as in what you can and cannot do with the tackling and all that. They're making an offensive thing, and these kids get faster. They go to these sprint gurus, just for the combine to get these numbers down. I got, you said all this speed. I was impressed with the tight end speed. Those guys were killing it compared to how it used to be. Because that's just a glorified wide receiver now. It's an oversized wide receiver. But you're getting, 4.3s? I think there were. One guy ran a 4.3 in the tight end spot, and a lot of 4.4s and just a couple 4.5s, If you weren't a 4.5, you were like the slow man, because it was blazing, I thought, when I was watching it.
Yeah, incredible, Kyle, right? What's it like to see that kind of speed in person? It used to be like you'd get a few guys, couple guys, and now so many guys just lighting up that turf.
Yeah, Dolphins fans are a little spoiled in that regard, right? Because we've become accustomed to being a speed team, and I don't know what peak Tyreek Hill's running at his 40 time, but that Brennan Thompson wide receiver running 4.26, one of the Styles brothers running 4.27, Xavier Thomas running 4.28, Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end from Oregon that Z mentioned, running the tight end record-setting 4.39 at 240 plus pounds, and even some of the jumps, right? Like we had record-setting vertical jumps at 45.5 inches. We got tight ends that are jumping 43.5 and 41.5. We're getting broad jumps that are pushing 11.5 feet. It really was incredible. Like all of the explosiveness. Now, the downside to it, and I think something that the league does need to kind of keep an eye on, is like nobody did agility testing. And I think the agility testing is more valuable than a lot of the linear stuff, right? Because you do kind of have diminishing returns. Once you run in the 4.4s, like anything beyond that is just, it's kind of like icing on the cake, but really once you pass the threshold, you're fast, and you're fast no matter what. So I don't know what the resolution is there for the NFL, but it's a big deal when a guy does an agility test, whether it's a 3-cone or a short shuttle now. And that used to be kind of status quo. And that for some of these positions tells you a lot more about what these guys have from a functional athleticism standpoint. The pass rushers, I want to see them run the 3-cone. I want to know how they bend and corner at the same time. And we're not really getting that right now. So as impressive as it was, there's storylines coming out of it for ways that I think the league kind of has to look in the mirror a little bit and ask themselves how they try to address that.
Yeah, I don't agree with Kyle on that, because again, when you go there and you do straight line speed means nothing in the game of football unless you're running, a wide receiver that's just blazing down the field, to stretch the field. But all these other cats, you got to be able to show, how you move, how you change direction, how you blowing out of the breaks, D-line, corner, even wide receiver, coming out of breaks. So he kind of misses that when these guys, all they want to do is run that 40 and do the explosive stuff, which is great. And that's all wonderful. But again, you got to show that you can turn and still be fast. And that's the one thing that like Kyle said, every year it gets less and less and less. I get it, they have the bench press the last day, and a lot of guys don't do that. And I don't blame them either, Again, a lot of guys get pulled chest muscles and bad shoulders, from it. And, to me, that means nothing. What you bench, it's kind of what your agility and how you move, to translate into the NFL.
What about for Z when you're talking about lifting versus the agility drills and the speed, and Kyle talking about the agility drills? As a guy who travels to, these workouts, and you go to the combine and you go to the school workouts, and a lot of guys save it for the schools. Quarterbacks will throw at their school with their guys as opposed to throwing at the combine. Just want to get your thoughts on the actual combine versus the on-campus workout, Z, and which ones matter more to an organization.
I mean, they both do, but some organizations don't really travel or send the coaches to the school workouts. They just send the scouts, and and a lot of these teams that do show up at the combine want to see the guys, and get their be able to talk to them and then watch them move, in real person. I've done both. The school visits are a little bit better because usually when you go, you kind of set up a dinner or a lunch with the guy you're going to go look at. So you get another chance to sit down one-on-one, kind of in a more of a relaxed setting. He's not stressed. He's not tired from the combine, going from room to room to room, saying the same thing over and over. You kind of, get to see what the kid wants to eat, and you cut it up. I remember I went to Florida State, and I did those two guys that came out that the Rams took. I had dinner with both of them at the same time. And it was kind of funny to see, how they each interact with each other and with me and the one scout I was with. And a lot of fun. We had a great 2-hour dinner, laughed it up, chuckled it up. And, it's good. You get to know the guy more as a person than a player.
And I wonder too, Kyle, I want to go to you first on this, and then Z. Colin Cowherd called it a BS seminar, saying he's done with the combine. A lot of people feel like the combine isn't what it used to be. And a lot of that is because of things like guys not running, guys not throwing, guys not participating in the Kyle, when you hear someone say something like that, especially someone with that kind of stature in the world of sports covering the NFL, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are exactly what Z's face is saying. I could give two expletives about Colin Cowherd's opinion on the combine. And even if the testing is becoming a lot more of there's gamesmanship on what you participate and what you don't, I'm still surprised at some of the teams that are choosing not to send the bigwigs at least for a couple days, just because of all the business that gets conducted there. And I know you can hop on a phone and talk to an agent and have the same conversation that you could have if you flew to Indy for 2 days to take a break from your pro scouting calendar, getting ready for free agency. I get why, the Rams and now the Jaguars with James Gladstone, who was the assistant GM with the Rams, those two teams, they didn't send the GM, they didn't send the head coach, but you would think the Rams of all teams would appreciate the value of just being at the right place at the right time, because Sean McVay just happened to be in Cabo when Matthew Stafford was there, and they grabbed the beer and said, hey, we should trade for Matthew Stafford. And Matthew Stafford said, yeah, the Rams should trade for Matthew Stafford. And that's how that deal came to pass, just happening to be at the right place at the right time. And that's the kind of stuff that happens in Indy. So, yes, there's a lot more showmanship with the television broadcast, and they try to make it a fan event and a 10-pole part of the calendar. And I'm glad they do, because I just looked down at my watch, and I just got home from last week, and the league calendar year starts in 9 days. Legal tampering and negotiations, you can announce deals and formally contact free agents in a week. And it was like the build up to the combine, and then the combine comes and goes, and they announced the salary cap, and in a couple of days, they're going to announce the official draft order with all the compensatory picks, and then free agency is going to start. And then you're into the pro day circuit, and next thing you know, you're going to look down, it's going to be the middle of April, you're going to pay your taxes, and you're going to be a week and a half away from the draft. And it helps move it along. So even if it's BS event, I, for one, am not done with the combine. And Colin can keep that opinion to himself.
Yeah, and I used him as an example because he's the biggest one who said it. But a lot of guys, Z, are saying
that's
these
why
things.
he said it, so we can talk about him. Let's not talk about him and give him ratings, please.
Well, he doesn't need our ratings. I'll put it that way. But no, seriously, man, because a lot of people don't like the combine anymore, and a lot of people never liked it to begin with. Talking about fans, but we talk about this all the time, guys. The NFL does such a great job.
Whoa, Gries. The fans don't like it.
A lot of fans don't like the combine.
They've changed it for the fans. That's the thing. They've taken it away from the coaches and the athletes who were going there to work. It's all fan fest now. Every event, every lifting, weigh-in, all that, the fans are there now. Before, they could never see it all. They couldn't be anywhere in the building. And now they've leaked in there. They're selling the tickets. They've changed the times. So it's got prime time every day, and it's all about the fans. So don't say it's not for the fans. It's all about the fans.
They keep booing guys when they're throwing and running, and they'll stop being invited.
It used to be like so quiet in the dome. And you just sat there, and the only chirping you heard was amongst coaches sitting there watching it and talking shop, in between runs or in between drills. But now it's all fan fest. Even the Players Association is involved. One of the big skyboxes there in the dome is set up for the players to come, present and past players, to sit there and, watch it all. So it's all about the fans. Trust me.
Jumps and runs. And I mean, that stuff sizzles for sure. I mean, it doesn't really, like you said, Z, it makes a difference when you're drafting guys. Obviously speed kills, but running in a straight line, things like that, not as important. But record-setting performances all over the place. We don't know what to make of all this when it comes to, what will happen with these players. I'm sure that if the Dolphins have had their eyes on a player who they thought might drop to him, and then he has great workouts, then all of a sudden he might not fall that far, and you have to kind of look at things like that. But guys, when I look at the combine, and Kyle, you were there, David Bailey was the guy who stood out the most to me. He's never going to see number 11. He's going to be gone way before then. But he's a great pass rusher anyway, but the kid from Texas Tech had a huge performance at the combine. Sonny Styles, the linebacker from Ohio State, stood out to me. And the quarterback from Arkansas, Taylon Green, was really good as well. Freakishly athletic with his numbers. But those three guys, to me, just looking at them, might have made the biggest jumps, or they're at the top of that list. Anybody else who stood out to you, Kyle?
Yeah, I was really surprised by just how explosive Eli Stowers, the tight end from Vanderbilt, is. He ran 4.51 with a sub 1.6 10-yard split. I know 10-yard splits. You could keep your 40s and just give me the 10 yards, and I'll figure out what I think I need to know off a lot of guys, especially guys that play in the core. But a sub 1.6 10-yard split at 240 pounds that's moving to go with a 45.5-inch vert, which set the combine record. So very productive receiving profile. Last 2 years at Vanderbilt, over 1,700 receiving yards. To have that kind of athleticism with the way that the league went this past year with all the multi-tight end packages and the 12 and 13 personnel, he's not really a guy that's going to live with his hand in the dirt, but you got that kind of athleticism, explosiveness, and the pass catching ability that he has. I think he's really juiced his stock because he was a productive player, and now he's an unexpectedly explosive player who also has the football instinct and can be productive.
Z, I have to ask you this on the defensive line, because with those two guys, you're talking about David Bailey from Texas Tech and Arvell Reese from Ohio State, who ran a 4.46, and the Buckeyes probably going to have 3 guys in the top half of the first round of the draft. But those things combined, those 40 times from those guys, Z, combined with the measurements for Ruben Bain, are we now looking at possibly a slide for Bain down the board, guys? What are we thinking?
Yeah, we talked about it the last show that I think he's going to drop. Not out of the second round, but I think he's a mid second rounder right now, just because of that. I mean, there's too many other guys that are popped off, put up good measurements in numbers at the combine, and it's only going to get better as they go to the workouts in the 30 visits and all that. You're going to see a lot of guys moving up the board faster.
Kyle, what about Bain? Your standpoint?
I think at some point, especially with kind of how I view the class. I think he's probably going to get dinged a little bit. I don't think top 5. I'd be surprised if he fell as far as he has him. I do think when I watch his tape, I still see the pop in his hands that gives me belief that there will be moments in which it is a limiting factor for him. But I think he can still create and dictate enough at first contact to give himself a chance to deconstruct blocks, and he did that at a pretty consistent level at University of Miami. But yeah, if you're going off traditional norms, right, like he is an outlier, and that makes him one of the great wild cards of the draft. All these guys that are out, like ultimate outliers, like the other guy that had even shorter arms than he did, Cassius Howell, he came in with 30.5-inch arms, and he had the fastest 10-yard split. He's got great reps as a speed rusher, but he's almost an inch shorter with his arm length than Bain is. So it really is tough to kind of forecast that level of outlier. And I think that's what's going to make it one of the storylines of this year's class is that positional value with good tape versus, right, it was the Will Campbell thing last year. And Will Campbell kind of got dinged for the arm length, for not having tackle arm length. His wingspan, his arm length was below the threshold a lot of teams like to have, but it was really his wingspan that was really short. And he ended up, just because of positional value and the tape, getting drafted in the top 5. I'd be surprised if Bain, with some of the other risers that we have, goes that early, but I still personally kind of think he'll end up being like a top 10, top 15 pick.
Somewhere in there, we'll see. But it didn't help him any of those other guys doing so great at the combine, because remember, early in the year, people were talking about Bain as a potential number 1 pick, but that's definitely out of the realm of possibility. Now it's your Dolphins Squad Show on the Locked On Podcast Network, the number 1 podcast network in the sports world, and of course, your team every day. That's Kyle back from the combine in Indy. That's Jeff Zgonina, former Dolphin. I'm Jim Grieshaber. Call me Gries. We talk about the Dolphins' perspective on the combine when we come back. What did Kyle see? Who does he want? And what are we looking at for the Miami Dolphins at number 11, as they are literally ready to make? And these moves are going to start happening fast. There'll be a flurry of them soon, guys. We'll get into that as well. All kinds of things happening. It's your Dolphin Squad Show right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And I get a chance to talk to you about, and I love college basketball, right? Who doesn't? It's nonstop, big games, tight spreads, momentum swings every single night. From early tip-offs to late-night West Coast shootouts, there's always action on the board. And now FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. That's right. You can build any college hoops parlay you want. Check this out. Rivalry games, ranked matchups, whatever fits the need, right? You can mix spreads, totals, and player props to match how you see the slate playing out. Then you apply the profit boost and instantly bump up the potential payout. And I'll tell you what, that's a lot of fun to do as well. Go safe, go bold. Ride with the team you've been following all season. It's your parlay, your style, now with more upside behind it. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, that's Z in the middle. Kyle all the way to your right. I'm Jim Gries, and this is your Dolphin Squad Show on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're live on YouTube twice a week. Then after the show, we upload, you download Spotify, Apple, iHeart, Stitcher, Podbean, wherever you get your audio content. And of course, we are on Roku as well. Shout out to everybody watching us on Tegna TV stations around the country also. And Z and Kyle, we're talking about the Combine. Kyle, of course, was in Indy all week long. Took it easy on the steakhouses, huh? I'd always gain 10 pounds if I go to the Combine or the Super Bowl, guys. Every week I'd be just gaining a ton of weight at those events. That's the danger when you go to those things, Kyle.
Yeah, you got to pick and choose your spots. So we did Harry and Izzy's on Wednesday, and then on Friday we did St. Elmo's, and on Monday we did there's a new restaurant down there at the JW that was kind of Italian food that had excellent food. And in between we went very light and the other days, and tried not to drink all my calories throughout the course of the week, because that's always when you get done with all the things you need to do and it's time to network, you can't do it without a little hanging around the water hole waiting to see who shows up when the meetings all wrap up. So that's all part of the game you got to play.
Yeah, it really is interesting, isn't it? For those of you who have never been to one of these things like this, everybody's there league-wise. You're networking, you're talking to people, you're getting your work done, and everywhere you go, you're seeing people at the steakhouses, the bars, the hotel lobby is a great spot to be. And just an awesome spot. Z, to your point about the fans have a field day. They see their favorite coaches, people from those organizations, and they get a lot of autographs, a lot of pictures, things like that too.
Oh yeah, I mean, when you walk from the JW to the convention center, through the convention center, and then to the dome or the field house, whatever they call it, there's always a little group of guys right there on that corner when you make that right, and they're always sitting there with their little binders with all their stuff, and every year I walk by it when I'm there, there's always a big Purdue fan. He's got all his Purdue stuff for me to sign, and so I always got to stop and sign, and it's always nice, but they're there. Fans are there on the streets, in the convention hall, waiting on guys that the 2B draftees and all the coaches that have played, or just the NFL guys that are walking around.
Yeah, man, it really is awesome. And I want to talk to Kyle a little bit about what the Dolphins may have seen at the Combine. And, from your standpoint, Kyle, been watching the content. Great job as always. And keep checking that out, guys, on YouTube and then wherever you get your podcast. But Kyle, just at number 11, how much have your thoughts changed, your outlook after the Combine? Or are they the same as before?
It's tough, because I think some of the names that you were hoping were maybe going to be in the conversation might have, like Sonny Styles, right? Linebacker, Ohio State, had one of the best on-field workouts. And traditionally you'd say, off-ball linebacker, like maybe he gets to 11. I'll go ahead and pop the bubble, right? Ain't no way that dude's going to be on the board for 8-11 with how he tested and how good the tape is and all the boxes that he checks. There's some conversation of maybe as early as 4 to the Titans with Robert Saleh and the Fred Warner impact that was there in San Francisco, and they don't have that kind of backer, and Sonny can do all that stuff, right? So I think for me, it was more, what's the domino effect of the 10 picks in front of you? And Caleb Downs, I think, came a little smaller than some people thought that he would, and he didn't test. He saved all that for his pro day. Maybe the ascension of Sonny Styles increases the potential that Caleb Downs is there for you at 11. And if that's the case, I think that would be a no-brainer best player available type of pick. And I would be in full support of that if that's who it ended up being. But they really are kind of at this interesting juncture where I could probably come up with 13, 14 names and say you could take any one of these and feel good about the pick. So you're guaranteed to have some, but how high on that list of 14 could you get, right? And then you've got some names that if you chose to move down, if you had the opportunity to move down, if somebody wanted to come up in front of the Rams at 13 and draft Ty Simpson, and Ty Simpson is not your cup of tea as the Dolphins, despite the fact that you need a quarterback, I don't know that, I love the value of TJ Parker from Clemson, the pass rusher, at 11. But if you were to slide down a little bit, he had a 1.61 10-yard split at 263 pounds. I mean, that's very initial explosive. He was over 10 feet in the broad. He's got a great long arm. He was excellent at the Senior Bowl. His 2024 tape was outstanding. He had 11 sacks and 19.5 tackles for loss. So there's production there, even if it wasn't necessarily as productive in 2025. So you could tell me they end up doing sit, trade back a little, trade back a lot. And I'd be on board with it depending on who those best 2 or 3 names are that end up being there for you at 11.
And we know, Z, from what this regime's all about, they're teachers. They want to get players that will be open to learning and will get better day in and day out. Obviously, you want to get a guy who's just on the upswing and starting to really hit that peak and then coach him into being better. And to me, that's a lot of fun, and you're looking at guys and you're going, who can I work with? Who can I find that I can just look into that little crystal ball, peek ahead into the future, and I can really develop this guy? I'm seeing something nobody else is seeing. There's so many things that go into it, and it's so much fun when you hit on a guy like that. But, the Dolphins have so many needs, Z, and we've talked about it so many times here on the show, right? Do you go with that edge rusher? You really need one of those. And by the way, Jon-Eric Sulllivan said he's really excited to see what kind of a leader Chop Robinson can be. I know you guys saw that quote from the GM, and he's looking forward to a big step up from Chop this year. And you've got some pretty good leaders on that defense already, Z. But with the offensive line being I want to say a little bit of a strength, at least the left side, a lot to build on there. And with that defensive, Chubb's going to be gone, and obviously you're already traded Jalen, so you almost have to think, right, defensive player for sure for Miami in that spot. But to Kyle's point, you could go with the safety from Ohio State, Downs, who's a fantastic player. Couple corners out there might fit the bill, and remember, Hafley's a DB's coach. But you look at those guys, and then you look at the rush ends. It almost certainly, if you had to bet, you'd say it'd be a defensive player, right?
Well, without a doubt. I mean,
yeah.
Again, I think there's quite a bit, at corner and rush end that, if you do move back, you're still going to get a quality, good impact player. And, that's what I think Dolphins should have that in their thought process, the front office, that if somebody's calling, we can go down a couple spots or even 10 spots or whatever. You're still going to get a quality player at either spot, I think, and that's, that's how it should be done. Because then you can pick up, hopefully, it'd be great to get a second, off of a comeback. Because now you can get one of each and still, I think, be very happy at it.
Yeah, and Kyle, it'd be awesome too. I mean, and I wouldn't rule out the possibility of trading it, right? It depends. Kyle, you just talked about some of those guys who really improved their stock at the combine. And if by chance one of those guys is still sitting there and there's a team that really wants that guy and views him as a missing piece, how likely do you think a trade would be there versus the pick?
Yeah, I know Jon-Eric Sulllivan would like to add more picks, right? And he's talked about it. He had the meeting with the season ticket holders and said, I gotta turn 8 picks into, get creative and get aggressive and try to get 2 or 3 more and finish with 10 picks. What that looks like, especially with, what happens if you don't land on a free agent signing a quarterback. Is it just going to be Quinn and a draft pick? Would you like to? I think you could probably do a pick swap and not lose a pick and acquire somebody's backup that's a cheap player that maybe has some upside you think you could tap into. But the best asset that you have to work with is 11. I think the biggest barrier is finding who's coming up and for what. And I think that's where you probably have to look down the board a little bit. You probably have to look teams in the 20s and because those teams, if they're sitting there and picking and they don't like where they're at and they look at their day 2 draft capital and they say, I don't know how much these guys are going to help us this year, but maybe one big splashy player could. That's what I think is your ticket to getting that big spike in draft picks. And I would love for it to happen as long as like 2 or 3 guys isn't there staring you in the face when you come on the board at number 11. But that's the challenge is who can you find that will come up and what will they offer you, especially in a class that, because it's perceived to be light at the top, is that going to make everybody hold on to their picks harder if they're in a certain range? Is it going to make them more willing to give it away? It's a really tough thing to forecast what kind of offers you're going to get. You don't just want to give the pick away just to move down the board and get something that's not an optimal return either. So there's a lot of stars that have to align for that to come together. But man, it'd be a perfect scenario if it did.
Z, is there anybody there at 11 that you would think the defensive ends, pass rushers, anybody like that, where you would say, hey, if this guy's still there at 11, we don't want to trade it. We want this kid. Is that guy there for you?
I'm sure there will be once we go through this process. I mean, we're probably 2 or 3 people, like Kyle was saying, that will be there. It's just that, can you pull the trigger if someone's going to come up? And you hope that the guys that you really like are there, and someone else really likes them, and is willing to give you some draft capital for that pick. That's what you want. Because again, we're in a rebuilding year. It's not like we're one of these teams that's going to probably go up to get that pick. That's close for that long run in January and into February. And that's what we got to hope for, because we're rebuilding. We're not talking about Super Bowl really this year. Half's got to get his people in there. He's got to get a quarterback. We got to get it, back on the winning ways, which Half is going to do. And, we're rebuilding. So that's what we got to do. We got to get as many good players in the building as we can.
Absolutely. Could never have said it better. That's Jeff Zgonina, former Dolphins defensive lineman. Kyle Krabs, the best in the biz, host of Locked On Dolphins, the podcast here on YouTube, wherever you get your audio version as well. Anywhere you are watching or listening to us right here on the Squad Show today. And I will tell you what, we got a birthday boy we're about to talk about on the other side. Oh my God, if you guys want 15 minutes of comedy gold, please, when you're done watching the show, go watch Joe Rose say happy birthday to Tua on WQAM today. Oh, man, was that funny. It's Gries, it's Kyle, it's Z. Kyle's got Indeed. We come back on the other side. I don't think we're going to sing happy birthday to Tua, but at this point, he probably wants another team for his birthday as bad as the Dolphins, and our fans want him to have one. We'll keep it going on the other side with your Dolphins Squad Show, Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position that you need to fill is still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you find the people who actually fit the role that you're looking for with skills, experience, and location, so you're not just sitting around hoping that the right candidate falls into your lap. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I talk to you here, companies like yours will have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Go to Indeed.com/podcast right now. Show support for our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions to apply. If you need to hire, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
There we go. Good job, Kyle, Jim Grieshaber, Jeff Zgonina, Kyle Krabs, Dolphin Squad Show, Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today is the 28th birthday, 28th, right? You hear people talk about him, you'd think he's 38, but that's Tua Tagovailoa. Happy birthday to the Dolphins quarterback. And guys, I say it a little tongue in cheek, but he wants out of here. You have to think as much as the Dolphins and the fans want him gone. So he's got a little bit of leverage here, Kyle, as well. He would have to be willing to rework his deal for a bunch of teams to even have an idea or a thought of trading for him. And so that makes a trade partner even more unlikely. And I'm just curious, I heard you say it on a show that you just dropped this morning, Kyle, on the channel, but odds that, you know what I mean? Tua, obviously he's going to get cut, right? There's not going to be a trade. I mean, I just don't see any possibility that they find a trade partner now. I'm giving up hope.
Yeah, I think it's a safe assumption that, and they can take this process out if they want to. They could designate him as a post-June 1st cut in 9 days and just kind of take it for what it is if they decide we're not going to see it through. On that show that I did earlier this morning, I talked about some of their options as far as how they can manipulate that contract for a little bit of wiggle room and then still move on from him this offseason before training camp opens. And that's personally what I would do, and that would leave the door open for, hey, maybe a team totally strikes out and would have an interest in taking $5 million in salary or something like that. And you could execute that trade after June 1st so that you're splitting the dead cap, because if you're eating 49 of a $54 million salary, you have to wait until the summertime to execute that trade. But I think a lot of the stars are aligned for this to end in a cut. And it's just a question of, are they committed to ending this as quickly as possible so that it's not a storyline that is central through OTAs and mini camp and getting reps for other guys, or do they want to give themselves every opportunity to have a chance to get something before eventually moving on. But I certainly think the smart money right now is that Tua will not be back with the Dolphins in 2026. And I think there's probably better than a 50% chance that in 9 days they process him as a post-June 1st cut, even if that's not necessarily what I would personally do if I were in their shoes.
All right, and that's Kyle Krabs. We're going to get to what he would do if he were in their shoes. And by the way, he's got an episode out on this that he just dropped this morning, Locked On Dolphins podcast. Same place you're watching or listening to us right now. You can find that as well. And Z, when I look at Tua, there are some teams that have need. There's always a need for a quarterback, especially one who's been a starter in this league. And we talk about teams like the Minnesota Vikings with J.J. McCarthy, and they let Darnold go to roll the dice on McCarthy, which, you know, in J.J. McCarthy's defense, the dust hasn't settled on that yet. There's plenty of years for him to make them right on that one. We've heard Atlanta because Kirk Cousins is gone now, and all they have now is Michael Penix Jr., different teams like that. And the one that I saw that maybe makes more sense than any of them, Kansas City, except for the weather. But by the time the weather gets bad, Mahomes will be back anyway, and Mahomes thinks he's going to play week 1, which would be insane. So of all those teams, Z, I mentioned 3 of them. There are other teams out there people are talking about that have need at quarterback. But to me, I think right now, just looking at it on the surface, it almost seems like Atlanta makes the most sense. They're indoors. They definitely need someone to come in there and compete for that job. And he played some of the best games of his career in that building when he played at Alabama.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be great for him to go to an indoor, arena. It'd be better, for him, but who knows? I mean, every team needs a backup quarterback. He's going to get a spot. He's going to get a seat somewhere. He may not be QB1 right off the get-go. He's going to have to, do the backup duty probably for a little bit. And then when his time comes, we'll see what he has. Maybe he'll get his arm back and be rolling, but someone's going to take a flyer on him. That's for sure.
Yeah, and maybe if the hip was a bigger part of it than people were leading on heading into the season last year, Kyle, maybe another year after that hip injury, toward the end of the season 2 seasons ago, maybe that heals a little bit more. But, you're almost at this point, you're almost kind of rooting for the guy. I mean, he's been just dumped on by everybody in the world over and over again. But, you always want to see someone get that second chance and take advantage of it. But you definitely want him gone from here.
Yeah, I think it benefits everybody. I think for Miami and right, like what we saw happen with Ryan Tannehill, and it was good for him to go to a place that had some of the things in place that the Dolphins were trying to but couldn't put into place, and he had 2 or 3 successful seasons, right? And then the Dolphins had a chance to kind of start fresh and get into the crack at getting the right young guy in the building, and we're going through that process again. But when you consider what the durability element has been, when you consider kind of the way in which the physical skills that already had a ceiling did not look the same, you consider the guaranteed money that hangs on the line in the balance, and if you bring him back and he gets hurt, you got $20 million in 2027 salary that hangs in the balance, right? I think for everybody involved, including him, and the way in which he's kind of seen his career unfold with the Brian Flores stuff and the Mike McDaniel, and things kind of go a little sideways with Mike McDaniel, and you could see kind of the public tug of war as far as whose fault this is that felt like it was playing out with some of the reporting throughout the course of the season. It's time, right? And there's no shame in it's time, because the NFL is called not for long for a reason, right? It's very rare do you see guys that last for an extended period of time and spend their whole careers in a single place. And I think Miami fans were spoiled a little bit. The guys that were around early on and saw the 70s and 80s and early 90s versions of that franchise, that's the standard, right? And I was born in 89, right? So like I didn't live through the standard years, but I recognize the value of the standard, and I understand why this fan base has an exceptionally high standard for what quarterback play needs to look like. They've got more than one guy in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, for crying out loud. So if that's what your standard is as a franchise, if that's what you are chasing with Green Bay and what their legacy has been, and what Jon-Eric Sulllivan is coming from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love and how they've approached it, this puzzle piece that you've had the last 6-7 years doesn't fit that model for anybody involved at this point when you consider all those other variables. So yeah, I think it's time for us to turn the page And I will be rooting for Tua to kind of get his career back on track wherever he ends up. But I'm ready for a different approach at quarterback here in Miami.
Zia, I know you feel similar to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's time for him to, have a fresh start somewhere else. It's best for the organization. It's best for the kid, and I always like want guys to have success in this league, and he's going to have it eventually, in some aspect of this game because he is a good football player. It ran its course here in Miami. It's time to him get a new place and a new look, and and he'll bounce back and he'll be a good quarterback again.
Yeah, the injuries, obviously, and in your head when you get hit like that and that you're one shot away, from slurping through a straw for the rest of your life. I mean, I wonder how most of us would be out there. I mean, Z's the only one who could really speak to that when you could be doing long-term permanent damage, Z, but you still keep going anyway. And, things in the back of his head, no matter how many millions you make, it doesn't matter. Your future is your future and your life is your life.
Yeah, but if you start thinking about it, it's time for you to retire.
Yeah.
Again, I always tell people, like, people ask me, are you on the concussion lawsuit? And I said, no, I never was, because I knew what I was getting myself into. I signed up for it. It didn't, but I just loved the game and playing. So I just went out there. If I start thinking about it, I was going to get hurt even worse. So as a player, you can't go out there and think about it. And that's why
I was going to say, he looks like he's thinking about it, to your point.
I don't know. I don't know the guy. I've never met him. I've never had a conversation with him. So I don't know how he ticks. He could just be that way. I don't know. Again, I can't speak for him. I'm speaking just for myself. Like when I put my hand in the dirt, I knew I was getting myself into that any play I could lose a knee or an ankle or any part of my body. But I was willing to do that because I love playing it.
That really is a strong statement right there. And Kyle, I want to talk to you about the quarterbacks at the Combine, man. A couple of guys did pretty well. Carson Beck didn't seem to hurt himself any, maybe even elevated a little bit, the Miami quarterback, day 2 pick. Most people looking at him like that now. But, Mendoza didn't throw. But when you look at Nussmeier and Simpson, a couple of SEC quarterbacks, elite programs, Garrett Nussmeier was the latest version of a guy who really slid throughout the season, had some injury troubles at LSU. And Simpson's the guy who people think could be the elite, like with the reads and the defense, and said pick things up quicker and be that guy on the field with the computer for a brain and be the real leader in this group. But did either of those guys, Kyle, because everybody's saying those are the 2 guys who helped their stock the most, did either of those guys do enough to at least give the Dolphins something to think about at 11, with Simpson in particular? Or perhaps more importantly for the Dolphins in this scenario, Kyle, if a team really loves Simpson and he's sitting there at 11, that might be the most likely scenario for a Miami trade.
Yeah, and that's where I personally sit on Ty, just because, I see where his strengths are, where his weaknesses are. I hear how Jon-Eric Sulllivan and Jeff Hafley have talked about what they're looking for at the position, and some of the areas where he's, it's not where he hangs his hat as a player. He's not the biggest guy. He's 6'1", 211 pounds. And that's what he weighed in at the Combine. His accuracy when it came time to push the ball down the field wasn't great throughout the course of the season this past season. And Jeff Hafley's talking about hunting explosive plays. And Jon-Eric Sullivan's talking about having a skill set that can play in any conditions and being able to compete in any environment. And this division runs through those teams up north that you got to be able to handle playing out in the cold. And I just don't know that I see that with Ty. So I think the best case scenario, and not to mention, is a 1-year starter, right? And so now you're a team that's going to be in the bottom 5. You got me up in my chair here. I'm getting all excited. You're going to be a team that's bottom 5 in the league in cash spend this year and probably next year, because they're not going to. They've told us they're not going to go out shopping a ton in free agency, right? And they've cut a bunch of the cap or the cash. They're going to have Tua off the books for 2027 for their cash spending. And this is kind of the cap reset year where they're going to have over $100 million in dead cap when the season's all said and done. So you're going to draft a 1-year starter and bring him in here you've got some workable pieces on your offense, but a 1-year college starter, and put him out here and hope that he wins the starting job, probably, if you're going to use a top 15 pick on him. And look at the track record of one-year starters in college and how successful those guys have been. It's a very light and uninspiring list. So I just think it's the wrong time for Miami to use that pick in this class. Now, if you want to go out on day 2 and you want to draft somebody that you think has the tools to be a starter, for me, Taylen Green's more like a round 5 type of target. I think top 100 there is way too rich because I've watched the tape when he tries to consistently throw the football and the accuracy's all over the place. As a multi-year starter, you're hoping he's a little bit more refined. Maybe you like Drew Aller from Penn State, who's a big body guy and really had a regression year in 2025, but that whole team was kind of a hot mess. And, he started playing quarterback late. So there's a natural baked in context for him if you think he's got growth potential. And I think you watch that offense at Penn State and it's kind of goofy as far as a lot of the scheme implement and how they're using offensive linemen out, split out wide at wide receiver and kind of stuff. It's great wrinkles, but I don't know how consistently I'd butter my bread there if I was an offense. So those are a couple names. I think Drew Aller's probably end of the top 100 would be where I'd feel good about it. And if somebody beats you to the punch, I'd say, okay, life's going to go on and we're going to have plenty more cracks at investing in quarterbacks. And then I'd maybe look for Taylen Green in the middle of day 3 and see if I could get my hands on him instead.
What about Klubnik from Clemson? He's got a strong arm. He's mobile. I mean, really inconsistent on the field last year, Kyle. But, man, that kid's got some talent. Yeah,
I think he's physically gifted, in my opinion. Now, I think the accuracy, kind of the same thing with some of the names that we just talked about with Aller. There's some accuracy stuff and some decision-making stuff. I think all that is just as relevant for Klubnik. But I think you do watch that offense. And, I think that offense didn't do him any favors either. So that's kind of the inexact science right now is how do you take a skill set and project it into a different environment with different skill players? And is that the key to unlocking what they're physically capable of being? But I think Klubnik's a middle of day 3 type of target too, like round 5, round 6, if you were going to go in that range. He's mobile. He does have a strong arm. He flashed early and then just kind of felt like he hit a plateau there at Clemson. And their offense really the past 5 years or so has been a plateau regardless of who the quarterback's been.
Yeah, and I mean, guys like Watson and Lawrence coming out of that program, strong pedigree from Clemson. And Z, real quick before we hit the break and then come back for the final segment of the show, I think the Dolphins are going to take someone in this draft, a quarterback.
Well, I hope they take someone.
Well, yeah, someone, but a quarterback in particular. They're going to take a quarterback, I think, in this draft in those middle rounds. And out of the names that we're hearing and the things that that those guys can do, some of those guys we won't know until they get into the league, right? But getting another young QB with a lot of starts under his belt in college who can play, to have competition in that room like Hafley and Sulllivan are talking about, I feel like there's almost no way they're not going to do that in this draft.
Oh, they have to. I mean, that's just the nature of it. I mean, there's nobody in the room right now, really. You have a guy that started, games down the stretch who's young, but there's no one else after that. So unless you go out and get somebody in the free agent market, a veteran, and I still think they're going to do that, a bargain guy, and then they'll draft a guy, and then they'll let it roll and see what they get, and then address it again in the offseason if it didn't pan through. I mean, they're not putting all their eggs in that basket thinking, whoever's in the room this year is going to be our franchise quarterback. I don't think they're going into it that way.
Yeah.
I think they're just going in to have a good competition, have somebody go out there on Sunday, and get the offense going. But it's not going to be a guy that I think that's going to down the road have a statue outside the stadium.
And outside of anybody they'd take in the first round, Kyle, do you think any of those guys right now would be a better option than Quinn Ewers? I don't.
I think Quinn's got a nice kind of baked in head start with being on the roster with some of the players that are going to be here and with Bobby Slowick. So I think I'd probably pencil him in as the leader in the clubhouse, but that's the beauty of it, right? You go out and you sign somebody or do a pick swap with late round picks and acquire somebody on a rookie contract that didn't pan out for somebody else, and then draft somebody and have the triple threat battle royale and say, hey, we're going to, from the first day of camp until week 1 of the season, it's up to you guys. And I think the more that you can get that competition rolling, not just in that room, but across the roster, the more gems you will find. You won't answer all of your questions in one shot. And I agree with Z completely. I don't think you go into this saying, hey, we're going to solve the franchise quarterback problem this year, right? It's just not a realistic expectation, but that's what makes the philosophy of the guys that they hired so important, because he's openly said, we're going to continue to invest until we find the franchise option. But the only way you do that is to swing the bat and keep bringing people in. And then when you get one, you still invest in quarterback to make sure that you have a surplus and you don't put yourself in a position where the Dolphins are in right now, where they have to go out and find one. And it's this awkward waiting period until they figure out who that's going to be.
And I have a feeling about yours, guys. I've said it before on the show. Former #1 player in the country coming out of high school, the quarterback of the Texas Longhorns. Remember, heading into last season, he was ranked much higher on that draft board than people forget about how highly he was ranked on that draft board. But then his final season at Texas had the injury. People were clamoring for Manning. Ewers had a couple of games that weren't up to his standards, and then he just sunk all the way down. So if I'm Quinn Ewers, I'm just salivating at this opportunity. I'm Gries, that's Z, that's Kyle. It's your Dolphin Squad Show, Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and the #1 sports podcast network. Final thoughts on the other side. We go around the league a little bit as we come out of the combine, getting into the league year, and when will Tua Tagovailoa be headed elsewhere? All that and more to wrap it up on the other side. It's your Dolphin Squad Show on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I want to ask you one question. Okay, Otto, what time is it? We live in a world where we can stream anything, order food in minutes, and carry supercomputers in our pockets. Somehow, buying tickets to a live game still feels complicated. Hidden fees, jumping prices, endless steps. There has got to be a better way. Well, there is. That's why I use the GameTime app. It gives fans the advantage and makes getting tickets simple, whether it's NFL games, concerts, comedy, whatever you're into. I jumped on the app to check out tickets for an upcoming game, and it honestly took me minutes. You can see panoramic views from every seat before you buy. The price you see includes all fees. No surprises at checkout. You can even spot zone deals where you pick the section. GameTime picks the seat for extra savings, and everybody's happy. 2 taps, and you have great seats locked in. Fast, easy, done. GameTime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Proud sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. There we have it. GameTime, making it a lot of fun. So easy. I mean, I remember the old days, the tickets would get mailed. They could get lost. They could get ruined. Did you lose the tickets? Or you're in line all day at will call. But so easy, guys, with GameTime. And we're a long way away from GameTime for the Miami Dolphins. So many things going to happen between now and then. But, Z, something's been sticking out in my head this whole show that you said earlier, man. And I want to come back to it right now. You don't win games by being fast in a straight line. And no team's fan base knows that better than the Miami Dolphins after this offense was built with all that speed and it never panned out, man. I've had that stuck in my head ever since you said it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you got to be able to cut out. I mean, I was talking more about the defensive players, and, like the tight ends and everything. I mean, because you can run fast, but you got to be able to cut out of your runs. Like just the other day, Ricky Prohl and I were talking. And we were talking about, fast receivers and everything. And we were talking about our old team, the Gray Show on Turf. Torrey Holt was a blazer, complete blazer. And like Isaac Bruce was fast, but he wasn't a blazing fast guy. But he was so fast out of his breaks. And that's what made him so deadly. And that's why he's got a gold jacket on his back. Because how he came out of his breaks and, how he could break down defenders before he made his moves and everything. Because like flat speed, he was not like you see nowadays, these 4.2, 4.3 guys. He's probably a 4.5 guy, I think. Maybe, probably a 4.5 guy, which is not a blazing fast receiver anymore. But the way he came out of his breaks was unbelievable.
Yeah, and Kyle, speed, not the only thing that matters. Obviously, Tyreek Hill, a huge playmaker in the league. And I saw Brady and Peyton Manning on an Ari Emanuel podcast. It's a great podcast. I think it's called Rushmore, the podcast where he has the best of the best from every field on. And Brady and Manning were talking about they're giving their all-time 4 receivers. And when Brady gave his 4, he talked about Randy Moss being in there. But Kyle, he was the only one of the 4 who was capable of running by DBs anytime he wanted. The rest of them, Jerry Rice, Larry Fitzgerald, guys like that, much more known for their route running, their hands, other attributes of a receiver than just that straightaway blazing speed.
Yeah, and I think that's, the diminishing returns. There's a handful of guys in the history of the league, especially a guy like Randy that has the size and the length to go with it, right? Like it creates such a larger catch radius area to target downfield when you have the kind of burst that he has. Randy also had that football IQ, right? And it was just when he was in Oakland, he chose not to apply it. And then he goes back to New England, and lo and behold, it's like, oh yeah, this guy didn't forget how to play football, right? He was just ticked off that the Raiders stunk. And, Tyreek, I think, is one of those as well. He obviously didn't have the length, but what I thought made Tyreek at his peak, in the early years in Miami, at the end in Kansas City, was how dense he was. That's what really stands out when you see Tyreek Hill in person and you stand next to him, just how dense the muscle is on a player of his build, because he's not a tall guy, and it makes him very difficult to get hands on because of how explosive and compact and muscular he is. That if you're trying to disrupt, like a lot of these speed guys are tall and long and wiry, or they're not thick through the core, right? They're the sprinter guys that maybe have like the build up speed, and then they get out in the open field. Tyreek had it now, and Tyreek had the density and the contact balance to go with it. That obviously we remember the press coverage reps that Kansas City hit the Dolphins with in the wild card game, and those stand out like a sore thumb for Tyreek getting pressed into the ground by L'Jarius Sneed. But by and large, if you tried to get handsy with him, because he had the speed now and because he was compact, he was really difficult to press. And that's why their first 2 years in Miami, guys walked up on line of scrimmage and tried to interrupt the timing. And if they put one safety in the middle of the field, we're just going to run and go routes, and he's going to run right by you.
It's crazy, too, when you think about it. But you look at some of the guys in the league right now, Puka Nacua, for example. So many receivers you could look at and just say it's all those intangibles that matter more than the straightaway blazing speed to make an elite, a great receiver in the NFL. And, man, it's a lot of fun. But when you look at the Dolphins, you have Waddle on the outside, and probably Waller doesn't come back. So you have a need for a tight end. Whoever plays quarterback, whether it's a young kid or a veteran looking to make a big name for himself, you need that tight end. It's a security blanket for a quarterback in that situation. So you could argue a tight end. And then, another thing that I wanted to talk about, guys, is you look into those draft picks, right? Not the first round pick. Everybody's stuck on 11. But where they're going to win or lose this draft is not going to be pick 11, guys, unless you draft a Hall of Famer. Then there's that. But Arvell Reese and David Bailey ran the fastest times for edge rushers at the Combine. But the third fastest time is a kid that not a lot of people knew about. Florida kid. We've seen him. We know him from UCF. Malachi Lawrence, guys. He's the third fastest. He jumped 40 inches. And he's going to be there, mid to late third round by most people's accounts, Kyle. And I know if I'm the Dolphins, I'm looking at him pretty hard. Yeah, so I had a chance to ask him a few questions at his podium session, and he said he played between 255 and 260 pounds. So it's not like he's a 235 guy on the edge. Now, there's a lot of growth that I think he can find in the run game, but it was encouraging to find out that his playing weight was between 255 and 260. And then he comes in here at 253, and with a 159, 10-yard split, goes out there and also jumps 40 inches in the vert and runs 4.52. I think he's a great target for the Dolphins on day 2. The challenge is, did he kind of test himself into that dead spot? At least when you get to the third round, they go 75, 87, and 90, right? They got 3 picks in very rapid succession in 15-pick stretch. But you go 43 to 75, you're going to be sweating bullets watching some of those names that you see, hoping that they get there to 75. And Malachi Lawrence, I think, is going to be one of those names that's on that list, because I talked to a couple guys that worked in personnel, and I asked them about both the all-star rosters. And I like to ask, who do you think is going to be the top guy drafted from the Senior Bowl? Who do you think is going to be the top guy drafted from the Shrine? And more than one guy that I talked to that's working in personnel for teams said they thought the top guy drafted from the Shrine Bowl this year is going to be Malachi Lawrence, and that's before he ran the 4.52 with the 40-yard vert. Wow. Yeah. I mean, and that speed, a lot of tackles for loss, Z flying off that edge. And you've said it a million times, getting heat on that QB is premium.
Oh yeah, I mean that'd be a great pick, and it'd be good quality place to get somebody in the third round because that's where you're gonna build this team. Third, fourth, fifth rounders. That's how this team's gonna be built. That's how your core is. Yeah, you gotta get your flashy players in the first and the second, but again, most teams are built in the third and fourth. Fred Warner, third rounder. You go down a list of some of these great players that are in this league right now. Where Kittle, third rounder. I mean, go down. That's how that team was built, really. If you look at that roster in San Francisco early on, a lot, they didn't really hit on their first and second rounders, but their third, fourth, and fifths. That's how that team was built, and it's been good for a while.
That's a great point, Z. And before we wrap it up, guys, I want to get your final thoughts and then have Kyle let us know what else he has coming your way here on your Locked On Dolphins podcast, wherever you listen to your audio versions, download them from, and of course, watching on YouTube and Roku. And I want to say my final thought of the day is it's going to be really interesting to see what they do with Tua. If you haven't watched Kyle's episode yet, and I'll let him tell you about it on what he thinks the Dolphins should do with Tua, it's a little different than what you've been hearing and seeing in other places, but it's got to happen soon, regardless. So hopefully, and I don't know if it'll happen by Wednesday when we do our next show, but I think by next week we'll have resolution on this, guys. And we've been moving on from Tua Tagovailoa. There's my final thought.
Oh, mine is I can't wait to see all the trades that are coming. It start picking up at the combine. A couple were today, I believe, right? And it's getting crazy now. I've never seen so many trades in my life this early, and even during the season. It's compared to like when I was in the league, nothing. You didn't get really any trades whatsoever. A couple draft pick trades here and there, but now it's year round, and it's just great. I love it.
Yep, trades, Kyle, and of course, tags being applied, things like that. A couple of those trades, by the way, David Montgomery from the Lions to the Texans. So if you're one of those people who thinks the Dolphins should trade Achane and get as much as they can for him, that takes one team out of that equation, right? We see that Marshawn Lattimore is being released by the Commanders, and there's all kinds of things happening in the league. The Kansas City Chiefs are going to cut Juwan Taylor, and that's exactly what it is, Kyle. It's trades, it's cuts, it's all kinds of stuff flying around right now.
Yeah, and then the Titus Howard to Cleveland trade this morning, that's a big one because the Browns, they're losing the whole offensive line to expiring contracts, and they've been a popular offensive tackle pick in mock drafts for that number 6 pick. Gives them a little bit of flexibility, and if not, then do they like one of the left tackle options that early? Like, it'll be really interesting to see what the rest of free agency holds for the Browns. But, for Miami, the rest of this week on the podcast is I do a simulated offseason every year, and it's the week before free agency, and it's contract extensions, salary cap management, roster cuts, projections for free agency, both internal and external, a 7-round full-on mock draft, a 53-man roster projection, and at the end you get a 3-year salary cap snapshot as far as what the contractual commitments look like versus the forecasted growth against the cap. And obviously this has been an exceptionally challenging one just because of all the things that were in the air. But when I kind of sat down and finalized everything we're going to go over the rest of this week on the show, it was, well, this is what I would do based off of what I know about these players and what I think I know about these coaches with what they've told us. And it'll be fun to see where it mirrors reality versus where the Dolphins choose to go in a different direction. And it's going to happen fast now, as we've said. We have $800,000 in salary cap space. They're not going to be big time players, but I also don't think they're just going to sit on their hands and sign vet minimum players for $900,000 between now and April and then call it a day. I think there's going to be some movement, and that's going to require some transactions to happen sooner rather than later.
How long do you think Tua's here?
The report that came out this morning from Albert Breer said that if he's going to be designated as a post-June 1st cut, which is probably the most likely outcome so that they don't trigger another $3 million for 2027 that guarantees on the 5th day of the league year, by the end of next week, that would need to be processed if that's the route that they're going to take. If they're going to, and that's probably the most likely outcome, regardless of what I think they should or shouldn't do.
Yeah, and give the people a little bit, just wet their whistle a little bit, a little teaser of what you were saying about Tua, so they can go back and watch that episode.
Yeah, I think you have a fixed expense where you're not going to get somebody to take the vast majority of this contract. And I would leverage that and say, you know, I could still move on from Tua and get this thing to the summertime. And if I have a fixed expense with Tua and I'm going to pay the money no matter what, you can reclassify some of that money and buy yourself some salary cap space. And then that way you can go about your initial wave of offseason and get rid of a bunch of other mature contracts. And you create that space, not with the intention of spending all of it, but to create the wiggle room in case there's a player or two that you want that you'd otherwise be handcuffed for. And then you're financially responsible all throughout the year. And then you're going to get to the end of next season, and whatever salary cap space you have, you get to roll it over into the following year. So it's a salary cap trigger that would allow you to create some wiggle room with what is a fixed expense with his salary. And then ideally you would roll over the vast majority of that to just pay off what you defer if you were to release him or trade him after June 1st for the money that gets dumped into 2027.
I don't know anybody else that does an entire simulated offseason with 3-year projections. That's Kyle Krabs right there. Locked On Dolphins podcast, YouTube, wherever you listen to or download your audio version of your podcast. And then, of course, on Roku and possibly on a Tegna TV station near you. That's Jeff Zgonina, call him Z. Jim Grieshaber, call me Gries. Kyle Krabs, your host of your Locked On Dolphins podcast. We'll be back on Wednesday with another edition of your Dolphins Squad Show on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Until then, keep your game tight and your mind right, and don't blink. Just keep on watching and keep those alerts set. The NFL news cycle is absolutely bananas right now. We'll see you Wednesday with another episode of your Dolphins Squad Show.